In the silent chambers of his tower, Saruman paced in circles around the Palantir, recently acquired by him, with his eyes fixed on the shiny black surface that, in recent weeks, had been showing him increasingly disconcerting images. But at that time, he had not yet surrendered to the Lord of Shadows. He still maintained friendships with the other free peoples of Middle-earth. Amid the hazy visions, distant battlefields began to appear, flying ships cutting through space, mechanized armies, and figures clad in robes wielding energy blades. It was not merely a window into Middle-earth. The sphere seemed to whisper secrets from another galaxy, one constantly at war, guided by a mystical force as ancient as the world itself. In one of these visions, Saruman saw a man with a noble countenance and stern gaze, wrapped in a dark cloak, walking among machines and soldiers in metallic armor. His eyes reflected intelligence and weariness, and his proud posture seemed to mirror Saruman's own. Fascinated, the wizard felt something beyond curiosity. There was a connection between them, as if they shared not just appearance but essence. The name came through a whisper in the echoes of the vision, Dooku, and the more he observed, the more Saruman felt the urgency to understand who he was. Disturbed, Saruman left the tower and headed south, crossing the forests toward Galadriel's dwelling. There, on the golden walkways among ancient trees, he was received by the Elven Lord and Galadriel. Without hesitation, the wizard asked for access to the oldest Elven texts, those that spoke of parallel worlds, energy portals, and mirrors of power. Celeborn hesitated, but Galadriel, perceiving the gravity in Saruman's eyes, agreed. And before authorizing the research, they summoned Gandalf, believing that only together could they interpret the correct signs. Gandalf arrived the next day, riding his old gray mare, and found Saruman already immersed in elven scrolls. The gray wizard was skeptical. Toying with the visions of the Palantir is like lighting torches in a gas-filled cave, he warned. However, recognizing that Saruman's unrest was not born of vanity, he decided to support him. Together, they began to analyze passages from the ancient texts that spoke of inverted reflections, twin entities, and rifts between realities separated by magical veils. Guided by Galadriel, the three approached the Mirror of Waters, a crystalline surface shrouded in mist, where the elves sought visions of the possible and the inevitable. When Saruman looked, he saw Dooku again, but now surrounded by a storm of shadows. Behind him, an even more sinister figure was forming, indistinct but brimming with suffocating power, calling itself Palpatine, the Sith Emperor. Galadriel trembled, stating that the one behind Dooku did not belong to that galaxy, nor to that era. Gandalf remained silent, his face tense. Saruman, however, was torn. Part of him wanted to help Dooku, or at least prevent him from falling completely into the Shadow's grasp. Another part, however, felt that this link with the Count might reveal something greater, perhaps the key to understanding the other terrible being whose presence he had sensed since he began using the Palantir. He did not tell the others, but in his nightly meditations, he perceived the second power slithering along the edges of time, something that was not from Dooku's galaxy, nor from Middle-earth. It was then that, among the forgotten texts, Galadriel and Gandalf found a ritual described in poetic and ancient language. It was a crossing spell, using 3 anchors, a ring of power, a living mirror, and a visionary stone. If properly channeled, they could open a brief rift, capable of sending an emissary to another world, even if only for a limited time. Saruman listened with growing fascination, calculating the consequences, absorbing every detail. The risk was great. The soul could shatter between the borders of worlds, or be corrupted by the entity behind the shadow. Saruman stared at the Palantir once more. Dooku appeared amid the red sands of a rocky planet, Geonosis. He was surrounded by robot warriors and strange creatures, but he seemed lonely, as if questioning his own journey. Saruman clenched his fists. Out loud, he declared that he would leave to help him, to prevent him from being consumed by the eye that watched them, or at least to understand why the Palantir had shown him that. Deep down, however, his intention was less altruistic. He wanted to understand that war, discover what that connection meant, and find answers to his own unease. Before departing, Saruman told Galadriel and Gandalf that he would perform the ritual at the rise of the next full moon, when the magical conjunction would favor the crossing. He asked Galadriel to lend him her ring for a single night and used the Palantir and the Elven Queen's Mirror of Water. Gandalf still tried to dissuade him, reminding him that even wizards are subject to temptation, but Saruman did not back down. On the night of the ritual, the treetops of Galadriel's dwelling were enveloped in ethereal lights. The sky seemed to bend over the tower, and the forest below fell silent. The three items were arranged in a magical triangle, and Saruman positioned himself at the center. Words in ancient tongues echoed from the stone. The wind rose, the shadows trembled, and a golden flash lit up the sky. For an instant, Saruman felt his body dissolve, his mind stretch in 1,000 directions, as if falling into a bottomless pit. Like Gandalf's fall into the earth's depths against the Balrog, but with a far more uncertain fate. When the flash ceased, Galadriel could no longer see the white wizard. Gandalf looked at the sky, uneasy, while Galadriel remained with her eyes closed, as if still feeling the echoes of the magic reverberating through space-time. The Palantir, now darkened and once intact, now bore an almost invisible crack, as if time had already begun to demand its price. The Mirror of Worlds had been opened, and Saruman had just crossed it. During his descent through the void between realities, Saruman saw fragments of life. Dooku's face shrouded in shadows, unknown creatures screaming in silence, collapsing planets, and hooded figures wielding lightsabers. His mind nearly broke. He felt the orb in his hand grow hot and then cold, as if it pulsed to the rhythm of the rifts he was crossing. For an instant, he was blinded by a red light that dissolved into metallic darkness. Then, with a dull thud, his body was hurled against the ground. Saruman awoke gasping, his face covered in soot, in a dark and damp corridor. The walls were made of iron and had lights that flickered intermittently. The air was heavy, reeking of grease, sweat, and ozone. Metallic footsteps echoed, grunts from strange creatures, and high-pitched voices spoke in languages he didn't understand. He was in the underworld of Coruscant, though he didn't know the name yet. Around him, hooded figures hid in shadows, droids patrolled the corridors, and children slept among rubble and broken machines. Quickly hiding the Palantir under his cloak, Saruman examined it. It was intact. Even so, he felt an unstable vibration, as if time had begun to demand its toll. He walked the lower levels of the planet city with cautious steps, absorbing the chaotic landscape, hunters with respirator masks, women selling droid parts, grimy youths trading information about Jedi and politicians. Saruman understood that he was in an advanced civilization, but one on the brink of ruin. The Republic, as they called it, was fracturing under the weight of its own promises. To avoid being detected by unwanted eyes, Saruman whispered ancient concealment spells. An illusory mist formed around him, obscuring his presence even from automated sensors and the most attentive Force users. With the spell active, he wandered through public communication zones and heard, repeatedly, about a man named Count Dooku, a former Jedi who had left the Order. When he used magic to deepen his search, the orb in his cloak cracked with a dry snap. The fissure glowed for an instant, revealing how little time remained. Determined to find him as soon as possible, Saruman approached one of the transport docks and, with a precise enchantment, bewitched the mind of a young bounty hunter who bragged about knowing exactly where Dooku was. And yes, he truly did. The hunter, his eyes glazed, led him to Geonosis, an arid and mountainous planet that seemed to pulse with echoes of the dark side of the Force. Saruman felt a stronger magical connection there, as if the fabric between worlds was thinner under those living stones. Upon landing, the wizard walked through tunnels carved beneath the mountain surface, guided by a presence that called to him like an old memory. The caves narrowed and a red light pulsed from the walls. Saruman, silently, managed to use a spell to mute his steps and his presence from all those winged creatures that inhabited the mountain tunnels. He continued to a curved corridor where he felt the presence vibrating. Upon entering, he saw a solitary figure with its back turned. Dooku, The Count turned, for the wizard allowed himself to be sensed. Or perhaps it was the force powerful in Dooku that warned him. But the fact was that they were now face to face. Dooku with saber in hand, but his eyes suspicious. For a moment, they stared at each other. Absolute silence fell. Dooku, observing the wizard's face, hesitated. There was something familiar, as if seeing himself reflected in a distant mirror. The saber wavered in his hand, and before he could react, he fainted, overwhelmed by the psychic confusion caused by the impact of that meeting. When Dooku regained consciousness, Saruman was sitting on a rock ahead, keeping his distance. The orb lay between them, vibrating softly. The wizard introduced himself as Saruman, from another world, and explained that he was not an enemy. In my land, I too walked among councils of power and ancient wars. I saw your face in visions, saw you surrounded by shadows, and I saw something much worse behind you, a vile man who consumes everything. Dooku remained silent, though his mind was swirling. The conversation remained tense. Saruman spoke of the Lord of Shadows, a being who manipulates from behind the curtain, seducing hearts through the illusion of order and power. Dooku kept his gaze fixed on the wizard, then spoke, "You're mistaken. He doesn't manipulate me. Darth Sidious offered me what the Jedi never dared. Freedom. The power to choose my own path." Saruman didn't hesitate. "You call him Sidious, but I know his name from another time, Palpatine. The visions through the Palantir showed me his name." Upon hearing this, Dooku stood abruptly. The chamber trembled with a burst of force energy. "How do you know that name?" he roared. His saber ignited with a threatening hum. "Only my master and I know his identity. You dare speak as if you're a prophet, but you're just another intruder." Saruman didn't retreat. "I've seen his future, Count, and if you remain at this man's side, you won't be the master of anything. You'll just be another pawn in his war." Dooku's fury intensified. He spun the saber slowly, but he didn't strike. Not yet. The silver orb glowed between them. The crack widened. Saruman looked at it with sorrow. He knew his time there was running out. Dooku, still burning with restrained rage, began circling him. The tension was tangible. The Force's energy clashed with the wizard's magic like two storms on the verge of collision. And, amid the whirl of wills, one thing was clear. Neither would leave that encounter unchanged. Saruman's crossing was not over. It had barely begun. The tense silence that dominated the underground chamber of Geonosis was broken when Dooku raised his arm and hurled Saruman against the wall with a brutal force strike. The impact echoed throughout the cavern, knocking dust from the stone ceiling. The old wizard was thrown like a leaf against the rocks, his robe tearing as it hit the ground. Dooku walked slowly toward him, his red saber already ignited, his expression consumed by silent fury. "You've crossed boundaries you don't even understand," he said, his deep voice controlled yet vibrating with anger. Before the Count could advance, Saruman rose with difficulty, muttering words in an ancient tongue. A blast of magical wind exploded around him, lifting stones from the ground and forming a shield of pure energy. The floating rocks spun around the wizard like enchanted sentinels. The impact was so powerful that Dooku stepped back 3 paces, forced to shield himself with lightning and force. "You're a master too?" "No, this power is different from the Force," he acknowledged, watching the stones fall with ceremonial slowness. The confrontation had begun, and it was now more than ideology, it was survival. Dooku then launched into attack, moving in circles with his saber in elegant patterns, each thrust aiming at Saruman's heart. But the wizard raised his staff, enveloped it in white energy, and blocked the blows with bursts of magical force. With each clash of blade and staff, mystical sparks lit up the walls. In a bold move, Saruman struck the ground with the base of the staff and projected a wave of power that hurled Dooku away. Wasting no time, Saruman raised both hands and conjured a sphere of light that grew until it outshone the entire chamber. Dooku, even with the Force, couldn't avoid being momentarily blinded. Staggering, he searched for the enemy, but Saruman was already chanting containment spells. Ethereal chains emerged from the air, trying to bind the Sith's limbs. Dooku broke some of them with his saber, but part of the magic immobilized him long enough for Saruman to catch his breath and prepare another enchantment. The cavern vibrated with the collision of two worlds. But victory was far off. The silver orb Saruman carried began to tremble violently. A new crack formed, nearly splitting it apart. The wizard held it with sorrow. The energy accumulated from the crossing and spells was taking its toll. The sphere pulsed dangerously, emitting small flashes and hisses, as if about to shatter. Saruman knew he couldn't cast much more magic before the connection to his world broke completely, trapping him there forever. Dooku, noticing the hesitation, roared and extended his hands. Purple lightning exploded from his fingers, striking Saruman squarely. The wizard screamed, his body twisting with the discharge. His staff was thrown far, and the containment spell shattered into shards of light. He collapsed to his knees, smoking. Before he could react, armed Geonosian droids emerged from the galleries and surrounded him, binding him with energy chains. The orb fell from his robes and rolled to Dooku's feet, who picked it up, curious. Upon touching it, a vision overtook him. Dooku saw, through the sphere, a dark and flaming world. A black tower rose above a sea of ash. A burning eye stared at him, deep and insatiable. He stepped back in shock. "What sorcery is this?" he murmured. In that instant, he understood that Saruman had spoken the truth. There was something greater, something even Sidious didn't know. Even so, he ordered, "Take him. I want him far from the surface." And so the wizard was taken to the depths of the living mountain. The cell where Saruman was kept was unlike any dungeon in Middle-earth. There were no bars, only curved walls enveloped by a blue containment field. Drones floated outside, monitoring his vital signs. The light was constant. There was no night. Time was a torture. Saruman, even weakened, began to form plans. He knew he wouldn't last much longer with the cracked orb. He felt his connection to his world growing weaker. But he also knew the mountain was alive and could be awakened. On a silent night, Saruman focused. Ancient words were spoken. He murmured with effort, tracing runes in the air with his fingers. There were words of malice in the air. The rock beneath his feet trembled. Ancestral sounds echoed from the depths. The mountain quaked. Alarms blared. The Geonosians panicked, running through the tunnels. Dooku was alerted, but it was too late. A crack opened in the cell wall, and a flow of smoke and stone engulfed it. When the upper chambers began to collapse, Dooku ordered immediate evacuation. Part of the mountain fell at that moment, causing a scene only a very large weapon could create. The sinkhole was intense, and everyone backed away. Did he die with the cave? He asked himself. However, Saruman was not dead. Among the rubble, covered in dust and blood, he crawled into one of the ventilation tunnels. That same hunter from before, now wounded, watched him, eyes wide. He had tried to use the ship and flee before the mountain collapsed, but hadn't made it in time. Luckily, he was very close to Saruman, and one's luck served them both. Saruman raised his arm, murmured a spell, and the hunter's mind was overtaken once more. The Star Hunter, without resistance, carried him out of the mountain in his ship, flying through smoke and chaos. From above, Saruman saw Geonosis burning in orange flames. But his eyes looked beyond toward Coruscant. After hours of flight, exhausted and with the orb nearly shattering, Saruman descended near the Jedi temple. The hunter left him on the low rooftops of an access platform and was finally released. The wizard staggered, eyes heavy, robe torn, but his determination still intact. He felt this was his final move. Now he needed allies or all would be lost, and he would never know why he had received such visions. The Jedi temple was shrouded in tension when Saruman, covered in dust, with tired eyes and the cracked silver orb pressed to his chest, passed through the gates flanked by knights on high alert. As he entered the council chamber, Mace Windu's eyes narrowed, and Obi-Wan stepped forward, confused. Anakin, upon seeing the old white wizard, frowned and instinctively reached for his saber. But Saruman, in a deep and firm voice, declared, "I bring information about the true enemy, the one you call Sith. I have seen him before, from another time, from another world." The Jedi Masters exchanged silent glances. They then received Saruman, and he was finally able to rest. Saruman continued, "Dooku and I, we are the same soul, born in different worlds, reflected in broken mirrors. Now he serves the Sith Lord, but he is not yet entirely his. If you want the name of the Sith Lord, I can give it to you. But in exchange, I ask that you spare Dooku. He is not only guilty, he is also a prisoner of something you do not understand." The silence in the room deepened. Mace crossed his arms, Obi-Wan stared at the floor, and Anakin seemed torn between doubt and anger. The name Palpatine had not yet been spoken, but it hung in the air like an invisible sword. Yoda, after long minutes of reflection, finally spoke. "Hard it is to trust shadows from other worlds, but truth there may be in what you say. If save Dooku you wish, help you must prove." The council reluctantly agreed to allow a temporary alliance. Yoda and Saruman would travel together to Geonosis, where the Count had returned in secret, perhaps sensing his days were numbered. Saruman, aware that the orb was about to break, knew that this would be his last chance to change the course not only of this world but also of his own. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, chaos erupted in the Senate Palace. Mace Windu, Obi-Wan, and Anakin stormed the Chancellor's chambers. Palpatine, now revealed as Darth Sidious, spun through the air with a red saber in hand, and lightning shot from his fingers. Obi-Wan blocked the attacks with precision. Mace slashed furniture in half to limit the Sith's vision, and Anakin was thrown against the wall but quickly returned to the fight with burning eyes. The room trembled. Palpatine had already killed 3 other Masters moments before, but now it was still 3 against 1. The dark power of Sidious wavered, but it remained terrifying. Sidious tried to hurl Mace through the window with the Force, but the Master resisted and struck him with a lateral blow. Obi-Wan spun, creating a distraction, and Anakin finally struck his leg with a clean cut. The Sith retreated, panting. For the first time, he seemed vulnerable. Coordinated strike knocked his sabers away. Before he could react, he was immobilized by a force field maintained by Mace and Anakin together. Obi-Wan, bloodied, approached. "It's over." Sidious collapsed, unconscious. The war in the soul of the galaxy took a new turn. As for Yoda and Saruman on the dry plains of Geonosis, Dooku awaited. The sands swept the horizon, and he remained motionless. Saruman and Yoda appeared in silence, the former wrapped in torn robes, the latter leaning on his cane. "Come to judge me, mirror?" Dooku scoffed. Without replying, Saruman raised his hand and conjured invisible beams that wrapped around the Count's limbs like serpents of air. Dooku resisted but was not surprised to see the orb still alive. "So it didn't kill you, yet. But I see you're going to use the last power it holds now, aren't you?" Saruman confirmed and said yes, he would use every last drop of magic at that moment. The combat began without warning. Dooku hurled Sith lightning toward Yoda, who deflected it with a simple circular gesture. Saruman advanced next, his feet barely touching the ground. Dooku tried to separate them with a force wave, but the wizard traced a circle of runes on the ground, trapping the Count inside. Yoda used his speed to spin through the air and deliver a saber blow that brought Dooku to the ground. The Count resisted, but no longer with arrogance. There was a kind of weariness in his eyes, as if he no longer believed that victory mattered. The day passed, and back on Coruscant, with Dooku imprisoned and Sidious defeated, Saruman was alone with the Count in an improvised cell in the rocks of Geonosis. The wizard slowly approached. "There's still time. You don't have to die here, a prisoner of a cycle you don't understand." Dooku raised his eyes, hollow. "What are you proposing?" Saruman opened his hand, revealing the Palantir now cracked on all sides, its inner light flickering. "Come with me. There is a world where we can begin again, where you will see what was shown to me, where you can choose another path." They walked together to an improvised altar in the caverns, where the wizard placed the orb upon a rock pedestal. The light began to pulse stronger. A golden beam shot up to the ceiling of the cavern, and the air twisted like a broken lens. The rift between worlds reopened, though faintly. Dooku hesitated only for a second. I am no longer worthy of choice. Saruman, with one foot already in the portal, replied, Neither am I, but still I choose. And the two vanished into the light, leaving Coruscant behind, while the Jedi Council debated, confused, about the implications of the multiverse and the emergence of beings who did not belong to that reality. In Middle-earth, the night was silent when two hooded figures appeared amidst the gray forest. In the distance, a dark tower gleamed under the moonlight, Barad-dûr, the beacon of darkness. Dooku watched it, his eyes now full of questions. Is this the Lord you mentioned? He asked. Saruman stood still for a moment before answering with a faint, weary smile. He was the one who showed me you, and so they walked together through the forest, under the eyes of the ancient world that awaited them in silence.